How's it going? Just me and my God box. Calm down. Do we have a video? No? We don't have to show it. I just didn't know because last time I started, and Norm stopped me. I don't want to get stopped again. I get all excited. Norm is in Detroit. Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, so how's it going? Today we are starting our second week of our series. Anyone know what the series is called? Box Cutter. So excited. So last week, will you shut the door? Last week, we talked about how when you move, one of my least favorite things to do is pack. We talked about how you have to go get boxes, you have to fit all of this stuff inside the boxes just to load it in your car, drive to your new house or apartment, and unpack it all. We talked about how obnoxious that is. We talked about how much work it is, how tedious it is. Well, today I want to talk about another thing that I really don't love about moving. And that is, how many of you have like a spot that is kind of just your spot? Whether it be in your home, maybe in your neighborhood. Will you close that?
Somebody's getting arrested.
Okay. All right, guys, focus. Bring it back. You got to pull the strings. Pull the strings. No, yeah, okay. There we go. All right. Never a dull moment in youth group, right? All right, guys. So one thing, how many of you have like a spot that you love to hang out in, whether it be in your house, maybe it's your backyard, maybe it's your neighborhood, in the city that you're in. You just kind of have this hangout. So for instance, when I was a kid, my neighbors had this tree. And then the tree that they had was surrounded by like other trees, kind of making like a little fort. And the tree was perfect because it was kind of lower to the ground when it started to sprout outwards. So it was the perfect tree for a fort. And I remember hanging out in this tree all the time. My parents were the kind of parents that would give us like hammer and nails and wood and was like, here, go build a fort. So I remember me and my friends being up in this tree and we'd make like little areas from, one branch to the other branch. And we just began to make this cool little area for us to hang out in. I loved it. It was like kind of my spot. I was there all the time. If I was outside, I wasn't riding my bike, I was in this area. And now my husband and I, we live up in Cedar, and one of my favorite things to do is to go on the trail. How many of you ever like walked or ride your bike on the White Pine Trail?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It is one of my favorite things to do. My kids and I and Norm, we will go and we'll do like a 4-mile ride in our bikes, or we'll go for a walk. And on that trail from Cedar, if you go where the library is and you start walking and you get about a mile down, there's a tree that has fallen. And it actually makes a bridge to the trail. And every time we go for a walk, we always have to go to that one spot. And then we kind of climb up on it, and walk across the little narrow part of the tree. We kind of climb in it. It's kind of like our thing, right? So we kind of have these different spots that we kind of come to feel like that's our safe place, or it's an important place to us. Maybe it is for you. Maybe it is like your tree fort that you have, or maybe it is, the back alley, or maybe there's like this creek and there's this cool stone that you like to sit on, right? Maybe there's these different areas that you like to be at. So when we move, we no longer get to visit those places, right? If we move and I'm no longer in the same neighborhood, I don't get to go sit at the creek on that stone. And maybe that's hard for me because I used to go there after school and I'd unwind there. That was my spot. I would go and I would sit there and I wouldn't have to worry about academics. I wouldn't have to worry about athletics. I just get to sit and hear the water and the peace. Or maybe it's for you and it's like some of you like the back alley where it's like that little road and that's where you go out all the time and you're on your bike and you're learning these new tricks. And so you love to be back there. That's kind of your space and you're back there and you're learning these tricks and that's where you master maybe doing a wheelie or doing these cool things on your bike, or maybe it's on your skateboard and you finally get down your alley-oop or whatever it is that you're learning to do. Maybe some of you just really want to parkour, finally get that super cool move, but in reality you just jumped over a trash can, so it's maybe not that cool, but to you it's super cool. So who knows? But we all have these spots and these places, and when we begin to move to different places, we lose that. We can no longer go and visit those places. So why am I sharing this with you? Well, the Israelites kind of had the same thing. You see, they had this one spot that was really cool. It was really amazing. It was like the most best spot. Everybody wanted to be there, but they really couldn't go there. You see, their sin stopped them from going into the Holy of Holies and to be in the presence of God. We talked about this last week. Remember, God put himself in a box, kind of like this, but probably way cooler, out of wood and all fancy and stuff. But God put himself in a box called the Ark of the Covenant. We learned this last week. And he did this because he wanted to be with us. He wanted to be there for us physically in the tangible. He wanted to be in an area that we could be in his presence. He wanted so badly to be with his people, but he also knew that he couldn't be with his people. He knew he couldn't do it. He knew that, like we learned last week, God is like electricity, sin is like water, and if you put the two together, death. Right? We learned that last week. So God puts the veil, the curtain, in between the Holy of Holies where he was and the rest of the temple, the rest of the tabernacle. So that's where we kind of see the Israelites kind of also know what that feels like. They didn't get that opportunity to go in there. The old covenant that we had, it's like the unrighteousness of God's people demanded this cap of what God could be, this cap of how often we could be in his presence, this cap of how deep we could go in a relationship with him. That's what the old covenant did. There was this cap on his presence and how much we could experience him, the full presence of him, and if we did get in the full presence of him back then, we would die. So we see the Israelites in this place. We see them in this place where they have God in a box. And we talked last week about how some of us do the same thing. We too put God in a box. And we talked about how we kind of hold on to this box and we carry this with us and we go to camp and we open the box and God comes out and we have a great experience but not good enough to keep him out. So when we leave, we put him back in the box and then we keep moving on and we live our lives normally. Because we talked about that. We talked about why we keep God in the box. And listen, I'm not trying to judge you or shame you or make you feel bad, because I understand. I mean, God himself put himself there. And so I feel like it's kind of engraved in us. It's kind of part of our, almost like our spiritual DNA, that we think that that's what we are supposed to do. We think that that's normal. We think that that's what we're supposed to expect is this. We think that we're supposed to have God almost in like a compartment. And a lot of you can probably relate to this because I know that I have. You guys have like different compartments in your life. You have like your friend compartment, and then you have your family compartment, and then you have your school compartment, and then you have like your social media compartment, and then all the way over on the side you have like your faith in God compartment. And you don't want those to mix. A lot of you are like, oh, the first time I bring my friends over to my family, it's so embarrassing. My family's so embarrassing. You don't want to mix. You don't want to mix your church and your school sometimes. So we start to kind of put these different compartments of where people are supposed to be, and then we say, okay, but now I need you to stay there, God. I need you to stay in your compartment. You can't come into the rest of my life. And you're thinking, well, how do I know that I'm doing this? Well, let's find out. If you are kind to your friends, but short-tempered at home, short with your family, mean with your family, you might have God in a box. If you are super okay with spending time with God, and you're like, oh, God matters so much and he's everything, but then you get home and you don't really feel that same way, you probably have God in a box. If you act really different in this building than you do anywhere else, you probably have God in a box. You see, we begin to kind of separate those things. We separate our relationship with God in our other parts of our lives. We don't let them mix. But you see, having God in a box is very Old Testament. It's Old Covenant. And so I want to talk to you today about something extremely important. In fact, this is so important that it actually changed everything for us. You see, God never intended to keep himself locked up in a box. That was never his intention. That was never the way that it was going to be. He also never expected to stay in a little room blocked off with a curtain. He never expected to do that either. And if you are not familiar with the gospel, Jesus died on the cross, and he did that to serve payment for all of the sins of humanity. So all of the sins that you have committed, all of your family, everyone who's ever lived before you, everyone who will live after you. He died for all of their sins. And so what happens is the very worst thing possible happened to the very best person ever. But through that, it has changed something so that maybe we don't have to live this way. You see, Jesus was so willing to sacrifice himself, to put himself on a cross, just so you guys could have a real relationship with your Creator, and not a open every once in a while type of relationship. So, now there's this super big moment in the Bible, and I would say it's probably the most important part of the Bible. At least I think so. And it is the scene of Jesus' crucifixion. And maybe you're saying, like, why is that so awesome? Well, you see, what happens is Jesus is hanging up on the cross, and he is beaten, he is tortured, he's been bloody, they put a crown of thorns on his head. I mean, who knows what all he went through. They mocked him, they stripped him, right? They whipped him, all of these things. Then he's hanging on this cross. And in Matthew 27, and we're going to start at verse 50, it says this: "Then Jesus shouted out again, and he released his spirit," which means he died, right? Jesus had to release his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So Jeff, will you put up the picture of Jesus that we have? You have to understand that Jesus came here perfect. This is the Son of God, right? This is the Son of God. And he comes and he decides that, you know what? I love you so much that I'm going to take your unrighteousness and I'm going to put that on so that when I die, you can put on my righteousness. I love you so much that I'm going to take your sinfulness and I'm going to put that on so you can have my holiness. And he decided that he is going to step up in a way that we could never imagine. And he's going to bear it all for us. And exactly when he decides that he's ready to go and he's going to take his final breath, and he calls himself and he says, you know, like, in my spirit I commend myself, and he's ready to go, and he says it is finished, and he takes his final breath and he's done. He says the curtain rips. It tears from top to bottom. Now, there are some stories in the Bible when you're like, oh, I could see that happening in my everyday life, right? Oh, you know, like, that makes sense. I could see that happen. And then there's other times in the Bible where we see things happen that we're like, that could have been nothing but God. You know, that's supernatural. And see, God does things certain times that defies science so that there's no other explanation other than him. And so that's what we see in this moment. The veil is torn. We no longer have this huge curtain that blocks it. It's open. And that doesn't make sense almost, because if you think about it, why would God want that? Why would he do that? What happened? Why did God decide to tear this curtain that he commanded them to put up? So then you start thinking, like, well, maybe people just no longer were sinless, right? There was no more sin. They finally got it together. They're righteous. They're holy. See that they just crucified the Son of God? I'm going to say probably not. Okay, that's definitely not what happened. So on the other end of that, in order for God to be with us, did he change his righteousness? Did he decide maybe he wouldn't be as righteous or as holy? Well, of course not. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So that didn't happen. So what happened? What changed everything? Because it went from you were not allowed to be in his presence except for once a year, and only one person got to do that. So even on the one time, think about like the most amazing thing you could ever do in your lifetime. Maybe it's someone that you love and you have a family reunion and everyone gets to go there, but only one person gets to go in and see the person whose birthday it is. And then you come out and be like, tell me about it. Like, was it so cool? But only one person. That's kind of like what this is, but on such a better level. So only one person is allowed to enter into the Holy of Holies. And everybody else just kind of sits in the back and watches from the outside. So even on the one time a year they can go into his presence, only one person's allowed to. Only one person gets to do that. So what changed? The only thing that changed is that Jesus died. The only thing that changed is that Jesus decided that he was going to wear it all, that he was going to become the perfect sacrifice. Jesus took it all. He took our sin, our shame, our unrighteousness. He put it on himself. He hung on a cross so that we could be like him. He now has us covered. And I want you guys to really picture that. Picture all of your sin, all of your unrighteousness. And Jesus takes it on his back. And he goes and he's crucified for sins he did not commit so that you can then have his perfectness, his holiness, his righteousness in the Father's eyes. It doesn't mean we don't mess up, but it means that he's covered it. He's taken care of it. See, God put himself in a box because of our sinfulness. He knew that we had to be separated from him. He knew that we could not be in his presence because if we were, it would hurt us. And he knew that the only way that could ever be covered is sacrifice. Remember we talked about if anyone went into the temple or into the tabernacle, the one thing they had to do was make a sacrifice first, right? And even then, the one priest that got to go into the Holy of Holies had to make other sacrifices to make sure he was clean enough to go in. So the only way that we can go into the presence of God is through sacrifice. The only way that we can be with the Holy One, the God who created us, is through sacrifice. It was blood that was shed. Yes, it's gruesome. Yes, it's tough, but so is sin, and that's what it deserves. So that's what happens. So in order for us to be with him, a sacrifice has to be made. So Jesus' blood covers us so that we can be in the presence of God. What that looks like is that when Jesus hung himself on a cross, it's almost like he died with a box cutter in his hand. It's almost like he knew what was coming. He knew that he was it. He knew that this is the only thing that we could ever need to get out. So when he died, it's almost like he gave us the tools we need to free God, to have a real relationship with him, with the Father, with the Spirit, with God. And so it's almost like when he died, he literally, I'm going to tilt it sideways so I don't pop God, gave us what we needed. And just like the veil, just like the curtain, it opens for us. He gave us the things that we need to open up the box finally, all the time. I'm going to stab myself. Apparently I shouldn't play with knives. Okay, and that's what it did. When Jesus died, he gave us the tools to even open the box. Because before we had the tools to open the box, this is where God put himself. And it wasn't until Jesus that this could ever even be possible. Without his sacrifice, without his blood, without his death, we could never have this. So what is the main point of today's message? The main point is that you guys need to let go of the box. This is not needed anymore. It might make us feel safe sometimes because sometimes we don't live up to the expectations that we feel like we have on us. But you see, we've already been forgiven. The price has already been paid. The sacrifice has already been made. So you guys now have a choice. Do you take the tools that he gave you? Do you take the gifts that he gave you and do you open up the box? Because when you do, your whole life changes. Because you go from having God in a box, we're going to dance, to God being with you everywhere you go. The ability that you have to do things, the ability that you have to go places changes. And even in moments that I don't feel him, even moments I don't realize he's there, he's always with me. He will follow me. He will hover over me. He will go before me. He will be behind me. He will walk beside me. Because I decided to open up a box. And because I decided that the cost that Jesus paid is exactly what I needed to be free, to have a real relationship with God. God never intended to put himself in a box, but he made a way for Jesus to come so that we can actually live with him, have a relationship with him. You know, we go through a lot of things in our lives, and we get angry sometimes with God because we're wondering where he is and why he's not moving and why we don't feel him and why we don't see him. But you forget that you've had your box closed. You forget that when Jesus died, he gave you the tools that you need to cut that open, but you have not yet picked it up because it's kind of fun for you to get to come over to the box and whisper your prayers into it and then have him come out like a genie and then shove him back in so you can live the life you want to live instead of the life you were called to live. We don't understand that sometimes. We get so caught up in what makes me feel good that we forget the reason we were created was to be with him. So you guys are over here and we're keeping the box closed and we're whispering to God like, hey, if you got time, I really need an Xbox. I need new shoes. And we're whispering to God when in reality he just wants us to take him out. And if we take him out and we choose to live a life with him, in relationship with him, he will never leave us. He will never leave you. It says that he'll never leave you nor forsake you. But the first step is to recognize that there are times in our life where we've put God in a category or in a compartment, and even worse, in a box. And we don't want him to mix and mingle in our everyday lives. But when you are ready and you are willing to move forward in your faith, you have to take out your box cutter. You need to be a box cutter. Because that is when you have a real relationship with him, a working relationship with him. So I want to close with you guys tonight, and I want you guys to take a second. Last week I challenged you to look at your life and to ask questions. Are you putting God in a box? Are you bringing him out at camp? Are you bringing him out at conferences? Are you bringing him out Sunday and Wednesday? And I challenged you to look at your life and to decide whether or not you want to open up your box. And today I don't want you just to have access to opening and closing your box and whispering to Jesus and asking for certain things. I want you to make the choice to take him out. This you no longer need. Because this puts a cap on the ability for God to move in your life. This puts a cap on what God can do for you. This puts a cap on who you will ever be, the gifts you have, the talents you have, the path you'll go on. This puts a cap on all of that. But when you get rid of this box, you can have a God who will move with you, who will do life with you, who will guide you, who will protect you. But most importantly, you can start to have that intimate relationship with him that we so desperately need and hunger. So where are you? Are you the person who's opening and closing the box? Maybe you're a person who doesn't even really know if you fully believe in God. Wherever you are, I want to challenge you today. If you are in a place in your life that you need to take God out of the box that you continue to put him in, even if you don't mean to, I want you to raise your hand. And by raising your hand, you're saying, you know what, I sometimes stuff God in a box because it's easier, because it makes me feel good. And honestly, almost all of us could have our hands raised if we're being honest, because I think we all go through phases where we want to put God back in a box. I know I go through phases where I'm frustrated and I'm like, I'm just going to put you back in a box because I just want to live my way now because what I thought was your way didn't work. Or I'm frustrated, or I don't understand something. So we shove him back in a box. So by raising your hand, you're saying, you know what, I'm going to take you out. And even though it gets hard, even though it gets tough, even though I might not see you sometimes, I'm going to trust that you're there. Because I want to have a real working relationship with you. I want to know you intimately. I want to know you like my best friend, like my Heavenly Father. I want you guys to pray this prayer with me. Jesus, thank you that you chose to be the sacrifice that I should have been. That you took my sin, my shame, and my unrighteousness, and you carried it to the cross and clothed me with your righteousness and your holiness. God, I choose to open up the box, but not just open it and close it, but take you out. That you reveal yourself to me in a new way so we can have an intimate relationship. I ask you into my heart and over my life and guide me. Father, I just ask right now that you just give these students this new heart, Lord, this new vision, this new way of thinking, Lord, that they wouldn't just look at you as something in the sky or something that they can ask things for or something they don't understand, but that they'll have a hunger to understand you, a hunger to get to know you, a hunger to be with you and you with them. And I just pray, Lord, that you will begin to move in a mighty way in the lives of these students. I pray that you'll begin to soften them, break down walls. I pray, Lord, the areas that they don't understand, that you will just be a revelation to them, that they'll begin to see you in a different light, that they'll see you for who you are, their creator, the person who loves them, who designed them. And I pray, Lord, that you'll just begin to have a relationship. Show yourself to them. As they begin to move forward in the steps of taking you out, I pray that you open their eyes to see you. Make yourself known. And we're so grateful, Lord, that no matter how many times we've closed and shoved you back down, that every time it opens, you pop back up and you are always willing to be with us. Thank you, Jesus, that you've covered us so that we can be in your presence. Amen.